things happening out of the blue. I mean, I was watching it from home, and a lot of things from the car side as well that we wanted to get right.
The most famous driver on the planet was sent to do community service for swearing, not fined, not reprimanded. Sent away to a development program in Rwanda because Max Verstappen used one bad word describing his own car in a press conference. That actually happened. And it was only the beginning, because the man who runs Formula One's governing body has spent 2 years making decisions that all seem to land in the same place, on the same driver. A swearing rule that started with Verstappen's mouth. A conduct code that silenced the entire grid. An engine ruling that froze his car solid while every rival got to upgrade. And a power grab at the very top that quietly removed the last person who could ever overrule him. Nobody has stood up and said they're targeting the 4-time champion. They don't have to. The decisions say it loudly enough. If you want the ugliest power struggle in modern Formula One, the one happening in committee rooms instead of on track, the one the broadcast will never show you, stay with this and get subscribed, because what's really going on here is far darker than a few fines and a bad word. Here's the part nobody wants to say out loud. Every one of these calls on its own is defensible. A swearing crackdown, fine, clean up the sport. A conduct code, fine, protect the brand. An engine rule, fine, keep the racing close. Each one has a reasonable explanation and a straight face. That's exactly what makes it work. Because lay them side by side, look at who keeps ending up on the wrong end of every single one, and the coincidence collapses under its own weight. And here's the truly uncomfortable part. Red Bull, the richest, most politically connected team on the grid, the operation that spent hundreds of millions building its entire universe around this one driver, is powerless to stop it. They've tried, they can't. Because there's a wall in this sport that money doesn't climb, lawyers don't breach, and trophies don't move. And Max Verstappen has just discovered he's standing on the wrong side of it, alone. This is the story of how Formula One's most powerful man boxed in its best driver without ever once saying his name. So start with that swearing charge. Because the detail the headline skipped is where it gets strange. In 2024, ahead of the Singapore Grand Prix, Ben Sulayem complained in an interview about the swearing on driver radio. "We're not rappers," he said, a line that landed about as well as you'd expect. Days later, in the Singapore press conference, Verstappen described his car as, in his word, fuffed. He was summoned to the stewards and ordered to carry out what the FIA called work of public interest. Served in Rwanda at a driver development program around the FIA's own prize-giving gala. The most famous driver in the world, doing community service for a word most broadcasts don't even bleep. And it didn't stop there. The rulebook itself was rewritten. Under the updated Appendix B, a first swearing offense in an official session could cost €40,000. A second, $80,000 and a suspended ban. A third inside 2 years. An active ban and a deduction of championship points. A driver could, in theory, lose a shot at a title for saying the wrong word 3 times into a microphone. Yes, it applied to everyone, but it didn't begin with everyone. It began with him, the driver whose radio gets broadcast most, whose every frustrated word becomes a headline. And Verstappen read it perfectly. His response was to stop talking. Clipped, lifeless answers in the press conferences where the rules applied, then speaking freely to the same journalists outside, where they didn't. He wasn't breaking the rule. He was holding it up to the light to show how absurd it was. That's the first exhibit. On its own, a one-off. So set it down and pick up the second. Because the crackdown was never really about language. It was about who controls the people who race. Buried in that same sporting code are provisions about misconduct and bringing the governing body into disrepute, broad enough to cover almost anything a driver might say or do that the FIA doesn't like. When the drivers pushed back through their own association, the response told you everything. The Grand Prix Drivers Association, the closest thing the grid has to a union, wrote an open letter asking, in plain terms, to be treated like adults, and asking where the millions in fine money actually go. Ben Sulayem's answer, reported across the paddock, was not that of a man who saw the drivers as partners. They should concentrate on what they do best, he said, driving. The decisions of the FIA were not their business. Here are the people whose bodies are the ones at risk at 300 kilometers an hour, told that how the sport is run is none of their concern. That's the second exhibit. A structure where the racers have a voice but no vote, and the man at the top has said out loud that he owes them no explanation. Now the third, and this one isn't about words at all. It's about the car. Earlier this season, the FIA's new engine balancing system delivered its first verdict, and it landed on Red Bull like a sentence. They were ranked as having the strongest combustion engine on the grid, which, under the rules, makes them the only manufacturer forbidden from upgrading it. Every rival, Mercedes included, got development tokens to improve. Red Bull got nothing. And when Verstappen was asked about the ruling shaping his entire season, listen to how little say he had. He was surprised, he said, baffled. Then, naturally, I'm not involved in it on a daily basis, so it's better to ask someone else how accurate these measurements are. A four-time world champion, describing the rule that froze his car the way a passenger describes turbulence. He can't appeal a sporting regulation. He can't outdrive a development freeze. The FIA reached into his season and locked a door, and there was no handle on his side. 3 exhibits, 3 arenas. His words, his rights, his car. And here's the one that reframes them all. While these decisions landed on Verstappen, the man making them was securing something for himself. Ben Sulayem put forward a proposal to abolish the FIA's presidential term limits, the 12-year ceiling his own predecessor introduced, with a vote at the General Assembly in Macau in late June, widely expected to pass. This came after he'd already been re-elected unopposed, when every rival was blocked by a nomination technicality requiring a representative from a region where the only eligible figure had already pledged loyalty to him. One blocked challenger, Tim Mayer, put it bluntly. "This is no longer a democratic process," he said, "when choice is replaced by control." That's the 4th exhibit, and it changes the color of the other 3. The man overseeing the rule that punished Verstappen's words, the code that silenced the drivers, and the ruling that froze his car has just moved to remove the last limit on his own authority. Senior officials have left. The checks have quietly thinned. And there is now, functionally, no one above him to appeal to. So stack the file. A rule that started with his mouth. A code that took the driver's voice. A ruling that handcuffed his car. A president with no one above him to answer to. Read them together and you're looking at a man learning, slowly, that the sport he dominates has been rearranged around the one thing he can't beat with a faster lap. And here's where anyone who backs Red Bull has to confront something uncomfortable. Red Bull is not a small team. It has money, lawyers, decades of political capital. Its chief executive sat across from Ben Sulayem himself in Paris just weeks ago. But look at what that meeting was actually about. It wasn't a team going to bat to shield its driver. By the president's own telling, it was a conversation about Red Bull's contribution to FIA championships. Corporate diplomacy, not protection. And that's the hard truth the title points at. A team, no matter how powerful, cannot overrule a governing body. Red Bull can lobby, challenge a ruling, work the politics, but it cannot rewrite a sporting regulation, remove a president, reverse a conduct code, or unfreeze an engine. The single thing Red Bull exists to do, give Max Verstappen the best possible platform, stops dead at the FIA's door. Past that door, their hundreds of millions are worth nothing. Which leaves Verstappen one piece of leverage. Not a faster car, not a legal appeal, not his team's checkbook. Just the threat that he could walk away from the sport entirely. Something he's floated openly more than once, as his patience with the new era has worn thin. It's the only move on the board that needs no one's permission, and it tells you how cornered the most powerful driver of his generation has quietly become. So look at where the power actually sits when you lay the board out. On one side, a driver who can do things with a Formula One car almost no one else on Earth can. And every bit of that genius is useless against a rulebook. He can't outbreak a regulation. He can't overtake a points deduction. What makes him untouchable on a Sunday means nothing on a Tuesday in an FIA committee room. Beside him, a team with hundreds of millions and a wall of lawyers, all of it stopping at the same door. Able to build the fastest car in the world and still unable to protect him from a single line in the sporting code. And on the other side, alone, a president who just engineered away the term limits that were the last real check on his position, who beat his last election before it started, who has told the drivers to their faces that the running of the sport is none of their business. There is no longer anyone above him to hear an appeal. That's the map. And once you see it, the word message stops feeling right. A message implies something you could answer. This isn't a message, it's an architecture. Every lever Verstappen might pull, every door Red Bull might push, leads back to the same office. And that office has no door above it anymore. Which is how the most dominant driver of his era ends up in the one fight he can't win by being faster. He's spent his whole life proving talent beats everything. He's discovering, in real time, the one thing it doesn't beat. The person who writes the rules, talent has to play by. So here's what I want to know. In a sport like this, who should actually hold the power? The champion who fills the seats and sells the sport to the world? Or the president who controls the rulebook and answers to no one? Right now, that balance has tipped hard one way. Tell me where you land in the comments.